Actually, we today have got the panelist on board. So, over here, our panel topic for today is balancing economic growth with sustainability. Our first panelist is Ms. Sneha Chugh. I would request, ma'am, as I'm speaking about you, kindly be on the stage. When Ms. Sneha Chugh has been a key part of the Winmart Group for almost a decade, where she also founded its renewable energy division and Solution for Energy. Today, she brings her wealth of experience in the energy sector to the forefront, shedding light on the opportunities that lie ahead and the immense potential waiting to be unlocked. Please, round of applause. Our second panelist is Ms. Pali Tripathi, the CEO of Tabi and co-chair FICCI Logistic Committee. I request ma'am to come on the stage. Wherein Pali Tripathi is a new age logistic leader and problem solver, blending deep operational insight with cutting edge technology to transform how supply chains run. She is the CEO of Tabi, a pioneer AI driven platform focused on delivering zero downtime, higher efficiency, and intelligent decision making for complex logistic and gold chain operations. Please, round of applause for her. Now I'll take an opportunity to introduce the third one, that is Mr. Santosh Verma. So I would request you to come on the stage. He is an HSC culture and performance coach, AGPAC and NE Global Operations, Sanofi Groups. Santosh is a passionate HSE and sustainability professional. He is a fire safety engineer, has completed his quality and food safety certification course from IIT Kharagpur and holds a PG diploma in marketing management from Narsi Monji Institute of Management Studies. He also has an international diploma in occupational health and safety from NEBOSH UK. Additionally, he is a lead auditor for ISO 45001, ISO 14001, ISO 50001. Santosh has over 20 years of experience in adverse industries, including pharmaceuticals, textiles, chemicals, FMCG, and food and beverages. He has worked extensively in the areas of environmental protection, fire safety, road safety, climate change, circular economy, plastic, waste management, ESG, and extend producer responsibility, that is EPR. Please give a round of applause. I would like to introduce Mr. Prasad S. Joshi, when mentor, consultant, and EHS expert. Mr. Prasad Joshi is not just an EHS professional, he is a strategic architect of safety cultures, a steward of environmental stewardship, and a mentor who has shaped the operational DNA of some of the India's most complex industrial ecosystems. With over 3 decades of experience, Mr. Prasad has consistently turned compliance into competitive advantage and sustainability into a business imperative. His professional identity, a qualified chemical engineer and certified safety officer, Mr. Prasad has cultivated a rare blend of technical mastery, regulatory acumen, and people centric leadership. His journey spans across sectors: automotive, petrochemical, glass, constant, FMCG, and e commerce, where he has led from the front in embedding EHS into core business strategy. I would request you to give him loud applause. Lastly, I would like to introduce the moderator, Mr. Karan Thakkar, is the founder and CEO of Recycling Company. It is one of the India's leading recycle companies specializing in e-waste management and recycling, which includes all electronic and electrical equipment, small and big appliances. The company also recycles solar panels and Linon batteries. With a pan-India presence, they are helping some of the largest companies, electronic brands, institutions, and individuals dispose their e-waste in an eco-friendly manner across India. Mr. Karan and his team has played a key role in creating awareness around the subject. He has received many rewards for his contribution to the e-waste recycling industry, including the Indian Leadership Award. Mr. Karan is also a member of NITI Aayog's Committee on Circularity. Thank you so much, sir.
I should say thank you, Aarti. The MC called sick, so this is where Aarti was replacing. So many thanks. And first of all, extreme gratitude. I feel so happy to be sharing this stage with all of you. And utmost, I'm extremely thankful for making time today. I'm looking forward to, having a great discussion and also learn a lot from you. Like, when I started this session, one of the things that I said that since morning we have been talking about business and growth, but LIBF is also about sustainability environment. And we are so fortunate that, we have some great talent that works across so many industries. So I'll start with this, I'll start the question answer. So Sneha, the first one is for you. Uh, did you really have a choice? How did you select to get into the renewable space?
So I absolutely had a choice. So our renewable energy arm, I actually founded around 3 years ago now. In terms of, I think many of you have met or spoken to my father, the chairman of Inmart Group. So he had started the company in 1997. I think because of the cultures, the values that were inculcated into us from a very young age, the inspiration really came from there. So I know you'd mentioned to be discussed as well, what brought this specific focus to my life at least, or why I got an interest into this space. I think really it was for me, I think for many millennials as well in the room, and I'm sure both older and younger generations, it's so important to see how we are playing a role to better the environment, especially. We all know how much, even in Mumbai, even just, I would say, I know in December, the AQI was, anyone that was in Mumbai knows what the AQI was and felt the damage to your own body from it. And so I think all of these environmental concerns, we grew up hearing about ozone depletion. We also grew up hearing about the ozone being repaired. And so I feel there was always the optimism of, you don't have to just sit and be gloom and doom and believe that, okay, we're destroying the world and there's nothing we can do about it. I think there's a lot we can do about it. And so even from high school, I remember actually when I was in around 10th, 11th grade, I had this idea that I wanted to get into renewable energy at some point in life. I always had a feeling of the three industries that I always mentioned that the group was not in at the time as well was always renewables, healthcare, and agriculture. And so I think at some point it's a matter of there are ways to dream and to deliver on social businesses that help the environment, that help the planet, that help people, and also generate profits. And so I don't think it has to be a zero-sum game between profits or people and planet.
Since it came so organically, which is why you're doing such good work in this space. So, the next question for Pali, being the CEO of Tabi, firstly, do tell us about Tabi, because I think you're doing some very interesting work. And being the CEO and at the helm of the affair, how do you balance sustainability and, how do you manage profits? And I would then request Santosh to also answer the same thing, that at Sanofi, how do you balance these two things?
Thanks, Karan. Happy to be here. Such a relevant topic. So, what Tabi does? Tabi means journey in Japanese. And we call ourselves the Operations Intelligence Company. In the context of the topic, we are in the business of believing that the cleanest form of energy is energy that is not used. And that is the focus of Tabi. So what we do is we look at all sorts of logistical problems, supply chain problems, assets, and we look at how do we make them more efficient, how do we reduce the fuel that is being used, how do we reduce the downtime, how do we make the maintenance so efficient that you're not buying more assets and increasing footprint, right? So that's what we do. Now the question, and I think it's a very wrong question, that gets asked, that that sustainability versus profits. I don't think that exists in any connotation. And even in the business, I think that we are seeing this very closely, that it is these are not contradictory KPIs. Um, any sort of business that you get into, the profitability is something that would always be the most explicit value that you will chase. But can you not chase this explicit value while delivering sustainability? I think now is a moot point. Just to give you an example, in the context of electrification, it always gets discussed. So we do a lot of work in the heavy and commercial vehicle space, trucks, earth movers, cranes. What we see is there's always this talk कि जब future bright होगा तब हम green होंगे, right? It's like there is something that's supposed to happen after I don't know how many years, and then everything will get solved. To give you one data point, one electric truck, it saves about I think 20 to 30 tons of emission, right? So it doesn't produce that much emission. Now let's look at it in the and there's 1% electrification that exists in the heavy and commercial space. If you were to look at the possibilities in the current space where we are in, where we're using diesel engines all across, where electrification is just 1%, if you did just a 5% saving on fuel, you would need at least hundreds of millions of electric vehicles to compete with that, right? So the focus really is what do we do in the interim as opposed to waiting for, and even electrification, right? The grids that we work with, they're 40-50% fossil fuel based. And we always think that when electrification happens, everything's going to be hunky-dory. So getting back to this, I think the businesses can solve these fundamental challenges while saving carbon footprint, while chasing profit, because I think they work together in my view.
Okay, thank you. Santosh, the same question for you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And rightly said by Pali. So sustainability and economic growth, it's not contradicting. Actually, both of them, they complement. Okay, and we have seen in industry, if properly implemented, integrated with the business, that created a lot of value. I'm happy to inform you, I'm representing a company which is globally comes in top 10 most sustainable company in the world. Okay, recently and last 3 years, uh, rated by Time Magazine and all major sustainability metrics raters. Okay, so we are there, and it's a top coming top 10 and only pharma company. At same times, if I look at the business perspective, nearly double digit growth delivered for 2025. Okay, solid product pipeline, new molecules getting developed for next 10 years, 15 years, lot of R&D and research is going on. So it's just balancing both the things. It's not that something is they are contradicting. It's basically complementing, and it's reflecting in all our parameters. When we talk about sustainability, so some of the parameters I'll quote what we are tracking at global level, what we are doing in India. So in India, performance as well, it's a great. Okay, it's a really matters. If you talk about basic thing, climate change, it's impacting a lot. Minor change, 1.5 degree, 1 degree rise average. Many of those cities, many of the countries, they are on the seashore, they will get fully submerged. Lot of population will get disappeared. Lot of flora fauna plant animals that they will get disappeared. Okay, so for some of the people it's just a temperature rise, but for others it's a question of their existence. Okay, it's such a big topic. So when we are talking on that, Sanofi has taken globally to achieve net zero by 2045, and that's a very aggressive target. India has target of 2070, but company is progressing towards by 2045 we have to achieve net zero. Regarding the carbon neutrality, okay, carbon neutrality 2030 is the target, and we are moving very aggressively on that step. In India, we are buying all those electricity, all green energy. Okay. we have hardly 15% that we are depending on the fossil fuel. So from that perspective, we are doing great in India, globally as well as in India. We are not just looking at the go for RE, we are renewable energy. We are also looking for the quality of what from what type of infrastructure, what setup we are getting those energies. So for that, we have commitment of taking RE 100 certification, like nuclear sites. They also create energy, but that is not considered as renewable energy. Okay, from RE perspective, if you look at generally, then it is considered. So we are not just looking at the move to RE, but we are looking at the quality of those installations, all that. When we talk about in India, we have some 85, almost 35% renewables we have achieved. If you talk about water, waste, everywhere it's a doing great. For waste perspective, more than 99% of waste, whatever getting generated from our operations, from offices, from factories, everything get recycled. There are hardly some waste in kilos. That's especially biomedical waste that gets incinerated. Otherwise, everything, whatever gets generated, that we are making sure waste is for someone, resource is for others. Okay, so it's nothing is waste actually. So we are making sure all the resources are getting utilized on the waterfront for various projects we have taken, and we have achieved all those. In India, we are running a very big project in Sundarbans. So you all might be knowing the Sundarban is one of the biggest uh, uh, biggest place here, mangrove. Okay, and we have a large project here, more than 4,000 hectares. We are restoring those mangroves, and that will have lot of positive impact. And that we are doing for long run, not for short run. Long run, anyway, we are moving towards renewable energy, and all those impacts are coming up. But there will be certain residual energy, non-renewables. So for that, we will create offset. So that project we have started 2 years back, and that will be for next 10-15 years. Okay, so a lot of activities we are doing, and on sustainability metrics, it's on top, same time at business as well. So it's not contradicting, it's a supporting. Thank you very
Great.
much.
You know, I think traditionally, so happy to hear the efforts that you have taken, and I've got the opportunity to see some of it myself. And traditionally, pharmaceutical companies have had such a big environment footprint. It is glad to see that you are taking that charge in that direction. One of the things I would really request you to highlight is, because I see a lot of business partners who would like to get associated with you. As we grow, what are the kind of things that you are seeing? When I'll come to you again, maybe next time when we go in the second round. But what I would request you and Prasad both is to highlight that what are the kind of things that now you look in new generation business partners as vendors, that I'm sure a lot of people over here can start preparing about. So, today we'll also try to touch about some topics that we hear a lot about, and in the interest of the audience. Circular economy is something that, we've been talking about for a long time. We read about it. Prasad, I would request you to, in a layman's language, and make everybody understand that what is circularity. And in your extensive career, since you have worked on so many things hands-on, if you can give some examples about it.
Sure, Karan. Thank you. Good evening, all. Circularity is a subject. Good evening, all. Circularity is a subject which we all know since from our childhood. Any simple language, anything which comes to home will get reused for some other purpose. Water bottle we are using for keeping oil, we are putting it Lysol, but we are not throwing that bottle outside. Shoe boxes, we used to keep it for keeping books or something. That is circularity. It is a simple way of reuse, refurbish, or repurpose. There are two ways in a business: linear way, where produce, use, and throw. And there is a circularity, that one thing it is produced, it should get long time in a purpose of use for different things. So that is called circularity. So one of the example I could share with you, some years back, there was a challenge given to us that our industry should not go for landfill. And we need to focus that at least 95% of waste generated in our organization should be used into the way that it should go either recycle, or it should go for anaerobic digestion, or it should go for recovery. Recovery is an incineration. So that is something which is not a part of circularity because it is generating ash. But still now government is thinking in such a way that ash can be utilized for road making, that is a part of fly ash purpose. It should be considered as a part of recycling and not as a part of recovery. But that time nobody knows how to calculate this kind of waste which is getting generated of organization. How will we segregating? So we had a team, we discussed this topic, and we realizes that a stream has to be defined, that the waste which is generating revenue should be revenue generated waste. The waste which goes for anaerobic digestion, that is composting, should be kept outside of the percentile, and the things which we can reuse or repurpose or refurbish, that should be keeping as a part of reuse purpose, and then focus on the remaining percentile of 2 to 3% which is going untreated for the some other incineration purpose or some other purpose. So we realize is that 90 to 93% of the waste generated was revenue generated, and it was generating revenue somewhere around $6 million. So that kind of a waste we are generating, which is getting resale into the market, and it is getting co-processing. So it's like plastic is going for reprocessing purpose, paper goes for reprocessing purpose, cardboard goes for reprocessing purpose. So this is the way circularity can be focused. And now the it is, if we can look at our home, it's a simplest way. We are not throwing all the things which we are bringing in home. So that is the way circularity has to be termed out.
Thank you for explaining that. I'm sure a lot of people now know what circularity is and how to implement it. And like you said, I think in Indian genes, right from day one, it has been taught to us, but somewhere I think we lost it. Sneha, coming back to you, where does India stand in the global renewable space? And we were just chatting, so I would like you to highlight on that as well. The solar waste problem also is a big one. Please share your thoughts.
So I think India's role in all of this is multi-part. Of course, we have our vendors, we have our suppliers from India. But I think one of the key pieces, again, vendors, suppliers you can get from whether it's China, it's Europe, there are other locations. And of course, we do know that in some geographies, they are further advanced or they have benefits of economies of scale. Their products are at better pricing. I don't think anyone in this room can really dispute that battery technology, China has advanced significantly ahead of anyone in the world. But the thing that I think India has is the people. So I think all of our engineers, our R&D, the scope that we have for technology, I think that's where we are quite far ahead in the race as well. I think just as an example, we as Vinmar Group, we partnered with a firm in India based out of Ahmedabad. We did a JV to form Urja Vinya, which is our designing and engineering arm now. Based out of Ahmedabad, we've got some great technical partners on there. We've done projects for Adani as well in India. We've done projects for other firms across Africa to deliver renewable energy projects. And so I think it's the expertise that is available in India, not just to remain within India as well, but I think, again, if we look at so many of our senior team members in Africa as well are coming from India. And so I think the talent is the cutting edge piece of India that we have the benefit of working with. When we talk about circularity, when we talk about waste, I think, again, coming to India, I think what we can see over here is that, and the benefit that we have again in Africa is that we can really, this concept of leapfrogging, it is possible in Africa. There's so much that we see in India. So as an example, we're seeing so much implementation of solar energy, of gigawatt level batteries as well being implemented in India today. Within 3 years, we've installed around 70 megawatt of PV and about 50 megawatt of battery technology. But all of that has happened because we were seeing India move in that parallel scope. Our engineers, our developers, our designers were all working on those technologies in India, within India. And so when it came to an execution in Africa, they already knew how to do it. And ultimately, a solar farm is a solar farm. You put it in India, you put it in Africa, you put it anywhere in the world. It's pretty much the same. We're looking at moving and transitioning into wind now. We're also looking at getting into mini hydro. And so this is where, for example, we've already reached out to various different consultants, different organizations to come to Africa, do feasibility studies with us to see if they can deliver the technology, become our technology partners, or at least become our feasibility study partners, because it is a new scope for us as well to learn from. When we talk about going ahead in the future, I think, again, what we see here is that India was an early adopter of solar energy specifically. And so many of those panels, again, panels maybe 15 years ago didn't even last, didn't have the same life as what they have today. So many of those panels that are now coming into the e-waste economy, and just for everyone to know as well, I have visited Karan's factory as well, just outside of Mumbai, in fact, a few years ago. So it was really nice to know that he was the panelist. When we had visited as well, it was amazing to see. I think it was maybe 2 or 3 years back. Even back then, they had already started their solar PV e-waste sector and segment. And I had asked the same question of, aren't you ahead? Isn't it too soon to get into e-waste? And again, it was for solar specifically. And again, it was just a bit of foresight of seeing that maybe not today, but within the next 1 year, the next 2 years, these panels in India as well are going to require some kind of recycling. And so I think it's the foresight that many Indian entrepreneurs have, which again, we can bring into the African markets as well. What I would say is, for solar specifically, I feel it is still too soon for the e-waste market. But for example, in other types of e-waste, so for batteries as an example, we do have a unit in DRC, in Lubumbashi, where we take used batteries, we do the recycling, we take out different materials from them, and then we use it towards other refurbishment and other recycling of our other products. And so we've got a closed loop. We don't need to import certain raw materials now for that as well. Along with that, certain things like, again, when we talk about sustainability, we've got also a unit which does used oil to furnace oil. And so again, not only do we reduce our importation costs, makes sense, it makes complete financial sense. And so again, I think for a lot of these sustainability initiatives, I think globally we're all coming around to the fact that, again, sustainability, the cost of sustainability is actually less. Again, going to the example of the panels and the batteries that we've set up. Batteries, even though they are so expensive, which they really are, but today, our cost of energy for a couple of our mining companies where we have installed solar plus the BESS, the cost of those systems, when we compare to diesel generators, which we sometimes use between 6 to 12 to sometimes even 24 hours a day because of the grid stability issues, that cost compared to DGs are maybe around 50-60% saving. And so when you look at it that way, it's a no-brainer. And so I think, again, it's about analyzing not just from a point of view of, oh, do we really want to go into this ESG compliance? Don't do it for the ESG compliance. Let the ESG compliance be a bonus. But look at what sustainability initiatives you can do, which will have a benefit, again, for people, for the environment, for the planet, but again, also for all of your cash flows, all of your P&Ls. I think there are a lot of potential projects, including, again, even EVs in the HMV sector. That's something that we're looking at as well. And so I think many of these initiatives, if we look seriously at what India has done, we can take a lot of that technology, we can partner with a lot of companies, with a lot of people here, and bring that into Africa. And I think that's how the India-Africa connection can happen.
Thank you so much for such an elaborate answer. And Tabi, you come across so much data now every day. So many companies, she's trying to fix data and trying to analyze for so many logistic company. Any interesting data points that you've come across?
Yeah, like how much we don't see. I think that's the most interesting bit about data, that all of us are sitting on tons of it, but we just don't see it. I mean, I'll give you an example because you mentioned you have mining operations. So, two examples. So, one company is one of the largest, I will not name, is one of the largest e-commerce companies in the world, and we're working with them already on their cargo safety and driver safety. And we heard that they were planning to buy about 3,000, 4,000 more assets, right? When I say buy, lease, deploy, etc. And because we're there, what we were able to see was that they're loading norms, right? So all of you who are in the business of manufacturing, or if you transport goods from one place to another, there is this whole, fashion in which goods get loaded on a vehicle, right? There's wastage. There is, by the way, the loading in India versus actual is close to 45 to 50%, right? Versus what it can actually take. That's the level of wastage. So the loading norms in that organization were close to 45, 50%. And we said, hey, let us take a stab at this. We believe there's a lot of data that we can churn that can tell you, and there's technology that we can put on top of it that can improve this loadability from percent, from X to, let's say plus 20%, plus 25%. And we did that. The first step was just data, looking at what was really happening there, right? So we used RFID tags. We looked at what people were doing. We looked at image analytics. For every type of cargo, for every type of a container, there can be a best case, the way you load it, so that it avoids wastage. It avoids wastage in terms of space also. And we developed this algorithm and an app where this organization could take a picture, and the picture could say whether it was a green, orange, or a yellow. And only then, when it was a green, the vehicle would be, let go. Now, this is an organization that is also known for technology, right? They're into cloud services, they're into a lot of things. You would expect that they would have tons of data on everything, but it's not true. So that is one example. The other example is a mining company. Very interesting fact about mining operations is that at a mining site, any asset can consume about maybe 20,000 liters at a mining site. It can be about 20,000, 30,000 liters of fuel that get used. There is, on an average, ability and potential to reduce that by 20 to 25%. What that means is, and when I say fuel reduction, it's not just pilferage and things like that. It is the way you are maintaining the asset, the way you're utilizing the asset. Most of the wastage is because you have these assets that are just standing idle and you believe it is being used, right? So if you're an earth mover, for example, if the engine is on, you would assume that the earth is getting removed and the work is happening, but half the time it is just that the engine is on and the work is not happening. If you look into those data points, what you realize is that you don't need that many assets. So this very quick, that use and throw mentality that is there now, which I think was better off maybe, with our mums and dads and grandparents when, we still have a pocha of the t-shirt, right? I mean, that mentality was there. But now it's just so easy to just look at, okay, you're short by 20%. Let's buy 3,000 more because we are funded or because we have a lot of money, or this looks very tedious, let's not do it. So that whole example that I gave, that the cleanest form of energy is energy not used, also applies to money, right? The easiest form of money is the money not wasted. And I think that can come from your ability to see data. I think all of us are sitting on tons of data in some shape and form. Technology helps a lot. Of course, we do very, complex algorithms that have like billion data points, and then they're churned together to provide. But I think there is somewhere a start that can be done in any sort of an enterprise for you to figure out, where are we wasting, right? Where are we wasting that is not good for the balance sheet and not good for the planet? I think That's where data really helps.
Isn't it too easy for you to sell when you put these demonstrations that this is the obvious cost saving that you will do, or is it still difficult selling?
The good thing is that people, and it's also a problem, that people believe that if you show an Excel sheet or a dashboard or an algo, they believe sahi hoga. Like if I can't understand it, it must be right. But we do face a challenge in especially, so I'm part of the RPG group, and you have a lot of legacy companies like Seat, Zensar. It's a $5.5 billion group, and they're all companies at various stages, and there are a lot of assumptions that are made about that when you are playing in multi-billion dollars, you would be fine, that you would be absolutely sorted in terms of even the basics, but that's not true. And I think there's potential and scope everywhere for us to use this data to do something good, not only to drive profitability.
Great, thank you so much for that. Sandos, the one request is, like I mentioned, do elaborate on what are the kind of qualities and checks that you're looking at business partners today, because I'm sure a lot of here would at some point in time, if they're not dealing already, would work with an organization like Sanofi. And then if you can elaborate on some practical examples you shared about that, how the culture is at your organization, from waste management to multiple other things. If there are any concrete examples also that you can give, would be very glad.
Yeah, thank you. So all the industries, most of the industries nowadays looking for implement ESG principles, sustainability, and it's not only just limited to the premises of the company. Okay, it goes beyond that. So when we talk about the scope 3, so that's certainly from vendors, from where the company is buying products. Lot of in our case, if I talk about Sanofi, so 90% of emissions, total emission coming from scope 3, that is from where we are buying or to whom we are selling. Okay, all our CFAs network, transportation, logistics of finished goods, or logistics of raw materials where it is getting manufactured. So in that nutshell, if Sanofi want to improve its carbon footprint, implement sustainability in true sense, not just limited to on premises, then entire supply chain needs to improve. Okay, and when we talk about supply chain, there are all lot of constituents of small vendors, supplier. So actually all those, if everyone is doing, then only in any large company can achieve their sustainability target. Okay, so we have program, we are working with all our suppliers to train them what they can do actually on their sites, how they can improve, what principles they can implement. This is not something that they will start and they can do it immediately or short term for everyone. Lot of company they are doing in very short span, but lot of companies, suppliers, they need some hand holding, some support, some guidance. Okay, so for them, their capability building, training, everything that we are doing as own as company, as well as their consortium of other pharma company as well. Their group called PSCI, Pharma Supply Chain Initiatives. In that, all the material suppliers, we are organizing conferences, training, conducting training for them, capability building for them, and resource support as well. So that's how we are looking at. So it's not about only one company is doing, entire chain should improve, then only collectively we all will improve. So that's there. And I'll request all the new suppliers, new vendors, or starting own ventures, look at all this in the beginning itself. Many a time, if you are going to partner with large companies, sometimes it happen everything is okay, but not meeting few requirement, and that put it on back seat. Okay, so look at this, is sustainability is something that is evolving very fast and going to be there. Okay, so in the beginning itself, if we integrate all those programs, processes, policies, then it will be very easier. If you have full visibility of your emission, environmental performance, any big company, they will be happy to connect with you, discuss on that. So that's a that may become, sustainability will really become enabler. Okay. Also, I would like to highlight something that Sanofi is doing. That's futuristic thing. Okay, on the sustainability. So one thing is eco design. Okay, so we are not just looking at one aspect, we are looking from end to end, from the raw material purchase to finally product getting disposed of. Okay, so in the R&D stage, when the product is getting developed, that time incipient stage itself, everything is getting analyzed while manufacturing. What should be the process? What should be the raw material? The processing time goes down. While use stage, efficacy remain maintained, and at same time it has lower environmental impact. At customer or consumer stage as well, how we can reduce the packaging load and all that. So that's a whole scenario getting simulated when the product was getting conceptualized. Okay, so that's a very big thing that is coming up and futuristic. Something that's a very technical on PIE, pharmaceuticals in environment. So that also we are doing. We are all our facilities. We have ambition now. In next 5 years, all our facilities globally will be LEED and well certified. And now in energy aspect, lot of new changes, new enhancement, new improvements are coming up. I remember when we were talking 10 years back when I was looking at my energy consumption, we were looking at how much energy is there, how much emission coming from that energy, that same energy consumption. Nowadays, India has improved or evolved so fast, and thanks to you and all companies who are working on the solar and renewable space, now emission factor has just became half what it used to be 10, 15 years back. Okay, so that's a big leap that India has achieved, and Western world they took lot of time to travel, but India is traveling so fast, so it's just matching of them in the very shorter span of time. Okay, so lot of new changes, new improvement are coming out there. Lot of opportunity as well for everyone to partner and collaborate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that answer. You have worked at Amazon, which sells everything, possibly everything, and also all white label goods, correct? Is extended producer responsibility the way forward?
So I could take this question in a little larger way. It was started in 2016 with plastic waste management rule when it was introduced by CPCB, and the base of EPR was PPP, so polluter pays principle, and that is something where it is not a compliance, but it is a requirement when you are generating something or you are producing something which is going to generate pollution, so you have to do something with the society as a return. And there the material balance cycle was completely formed, that a sourcer who is a producer of a plastic or paper, a consumer who is PIBO category, that is brand owner, and then the consumer. So consumer, you cannot take back anything which you are selling to them, but you are responsible to recycle whatever you sold to the customer, to break a cycle where the recycler will be introduced as a part of your complete supply chain management, and this material balance will be totally squeezed off the way. It will be ensuring that my pollution consent or my pollution condition is completely mitigated. Yes, plastic, then it is introduced with e-waste, then subsequently batteries waste. Last year, 1st October, it was bulk liquid. Whosoever is consuming 5,000 liter of water, he is responsible to at least, we can say, treat the water of 10% or 20% after 2030 through STPs or treatment plants. That is what is coming up. For even now, it is going to apply for the cooperative societies like housing societies also, and big malls. Paper, metal, and glass, which is coming up from 1st April 2026. So EPR is going to fulfill the market requirement with compliance way, and it is ensuring that whosoever is producing pollution, he is responsible to mitigate the solution.
So you will be surprised that we are one of the few countries where extended producer responsibility has been implemented so effectively, and batteries, electronic waste, plastic, metals, and so many things. I think it is just a matter of time that we'll become one of the few countries where all of this will be implemented so significantly. And like you said, no, let the polluters pay. At least there is a responsibility on the producer to take it back and to recycle in some form or the other.
So one great thing, EPR was introduced by EU, European Union, but it is the way it is implemented in India. While having this foreign trade deal, EU have taken learnings from India to give us back so that we can effectively implement the EPR rules in our European Union.
And I think the portal etc is working fabulously well. At least we are making some improvements. So thank you so much. You know, before we open for questions, if there's anything any of you would like to add, please do so. No? Okay. Yeah. Anybody has any questions, please feel free to.
Thank you. I think the session was very, very interesting. I just have two questions because I see very large organizations. Ma'am, I'll start with you from, considering the RPG group, what are the specific skills you think the next generation of leaders will require to continue the sustainability journey? That's one. And what are the strategies you have used to, in a large organization like yours to effectively manage the resistance towards sustainability?
Should I go first?
Yes, please. I
Yeah,
think
okay.
it's open to the panel.
Sure. So you asked two questions. Sorry, I wasn't able to hear that clearly. The first question is on what kind of skills do the next generation leaders need, given the world that we live in and the priorities that we need to set. And the second question was, how do you manage sustainability as an imperative in a larger group? Is that what you said?
Yes, that's
Okay,
correct.
great.
More
So
about
in terms
change.
of the skills that you need, more and more, all the stuff that was associated with intelligence and knowing and information is going to be done by machines, right? We know that already. All of us who are using GPT very often would be realizing we are becoming a little dumb, right? In terms of we are not able to think on our own. It's almost like till we hear that from GPT, our own thought process is not as refined. So that's gone, right? Like your ability to do great maths, your ability to know all science facts, brain vitas and stuff that we've been raised on, right? All that is gone. What remains is something that is amazing is our ability to be more and more humane, right, as a skill. What that means is, are you empathetic? Are you able to communicate well? Are you able to work across geographies, across boundaries? Are you able to manage different type of people? Because while the world is getting smaller and smaller in some way, it is also getting, very, very diverse. So you'll have Gen Z problems, you'll have language problems, you'll have people who understand technology, people who don't understand technology. So the ability to be very human and skills associated with that, I think the first one. And the second one is, and which ties to the second question is, at more and more this question is getting asked that, so great, you are doing something in terms of making profits, but what are you doing to give back? You're not going to be able to attract the right talent if you're not answering that. So group like RPG and, a lot of the big organizations, if you want to attract the right talent, which is extremely crucial because capital is abundant, right? It's easy to get now, given the structures that operate. The skills is where you falter. And if you go and ask this young talent, they want to work on problems that matter. They're not really that bothered about, what was your EBITDA for 5 years. Yes, they want their salary to come, but they're not into it for the next 20 years. So they look at it as a problem statement. And that is where it fits in. That is good for business to reframe the purpose that has been formed, right? Of course, you need to make profit to be able to address the purpose, but it is very ingrained. So be more human as a human and humane as a skill. And if you want to attract the right talent, then it has to be something bigger than whatever it is in terms of the balance sheet. Okay.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Yeah. My name is Hemendra. I am working on a circular economy and the carbon footprint management project management consultancy. The question is for Sneha. Uh, what are the regulatory as well as the safety challenges when we wanted to expand into the African subcontinent? And how do you help and how do you manage this?
So I think the first piece that I would say is that as an African subcontinent, um, I don't like answering questions because that's like asking for Asia what are the requirements. So there's so many countries. So every country definitely has their own safety and environmental regulations. What I would say is that I think overall, roughly again depending on which region you're discussing, so I'll speak more DRC specific. I would say especially anything to do with environmental regulations, it is an emerging market. So as with any emerging market, again, you can see even some of the regulations changing in India, as different pollution matters more than certain progress or development as well. So we're not at quite at that stage. Of course, there are certain safety and environmental combination regulations. So, as an example, for certain factories, they do come and do an air quality check every month, to make sure that you are not emitting certain pollutants into the air, especially if you have any population living nearby. So there's certain practices and regulations like that that are in place. But overall, I would say compared to, let's say, India, they are a little bit more relaxed. I would say that's more, again, developing regulations. In terms of safety, I think because of, at least again with DRC, because of the number of MNCs or international companies, international presence, because of the large focus on mining as well. And again, most of mining, it's exported to various, again, down the line, different companies where I think, as mentioned, even for Sanofi, there's a lot of people down the line that are looking back all the way to see how was the producer following certain chains and metrics. And so I think that is very much in place from the companies, even more stringently than even certain regulatory requirements, but to make sure that down the line your supply chain or your vendors are not going to stop coming to you because maybe you're following the bare minimum, but you're missing the bigger picture. I would say again in East Africa, in West Africa, I think some of these regulations are definitely more developed. And I would then also say Southern and Northern Africa are even further ahead in many of those areas as well.
Do we have time for more questions?
One question.
That's my last one. This question is specific to Ms. Neha from Winmart. I've heard you talk about how you collaborate with Indian companies or probably other global companies in terms of skills. What is Winmart's ethos in terms of skilling locals? What do you do in partnership with government? Does government sort of support in that? The question really is to understand how the local population gets involved in the organization's role in sustainability, and how does the government support companies like yourselves?
Sure, thank you. So in terms of government support, there are various technical schools, there's technical organizations. As an example, again, in DRC, there is an organization called in English, INPP, where we do pay tax for our team members every month. And once you pay that tax, you also are able to avail training for those team members. And so there are benefits like that. But for us as a group, as an example, we have a program called the National Development Program. And so that was started as an official program with proper SOPs, processes, everything, about three years ago now. Of course, we obviously were doing skilling informally for all these years. But with the NDP now, we actually identify our top performing national candidates or national team members rather. and then we do a skills analysis, a skills need assessment. Then we decide who is the right trainer for them. We've also got soft skills external trainer who is also Congolese, so that again the language and the knowledge transfer becomes a bit culturally easier as well. And so that's kind of how some of these programs, along with that on the non-profit side. So we have Vinmart Foundation that's active in DRC. We do various education projects. That is everything from digital literacy. We actually do basic literacy as well for adults. We do financial literacy. Along with that, we have a scholarship program that we run. That scholarship program is twofold. One is we take students from other nonprofits that we work with, schools, orphanages, etc. But then we also started 2 years ago now. We started a program where all of our in-house team members, so people who were in the sort of blue collar categories, where we know obviously their salaries are on the slightly lower side as well in blue collar work, we then made a program so that they can nominate their children to be a part of our scholarship program. And so currently active, we've got about 45 students that are studying in university. We have out of those students, around 15 of those students are actually studying in India. Between there's 2 students in MSU and Baroda, and the remaining are in Symbiosis and Pune. We have another 5 that have been selected to join in the June batch, so when the next scholar year starts. Along with that, we've got about 6 students in Tunisia, and we've got the remainder studying in DRC, maybe because they've studied medicine, law, things that have to be studied locally. And so these are the various different kind of levels of programming that we try to inculcate. And then along with that, again, knowledge transfer happens even every day. And so we also have partnered with a firm from India to do a language training for our expats. And so we've seen that it makes a difference even when you can throw in a few Hindi words, while you're training in English, but if you can explain a word in Hindi and then explain what it is in French. So we do language training for our expats. We've mandated it. And so our team members that come from India or any other country as well, if they don't speak French or Swahili, it's a requirement within a year for them to learn the language, such that even in their day-to-day conversations, they're able to do that knowledge transfer.
Great. Thank you so much. I can see so many questions. Can I request that you can take it offline with the respected speakers? So with this, we come to a close. What I would request is Mr. Deepak Gadia to please give mementos to our panelists. And thank you so much. It was very enriching for taking out this time, and at least for me, and I'm sure everybody out here. Can we have a huge round of applause for all our panelists today?